Hi, I'm Chris Overstreet, and I have opinions. And, well, it's been 2 weeks since the election, and to be perfectly honest, it is everything I feared, and in fact, what we've seen coming out of the Trump transition team implies that what's coming is going to be even worse than I thought. Now, I'm not here today to talk to you about what the Democrats should have done because if you turn on punditry, you'll get all sorts of stuff, usually conflicting. And in any case, the Democratic Party is not going to listen to you or me. They're just not. We had our chance. The only time at which any elected official has to listen to you is when you cast your ballot. You can write all the petitions you want, you can make all the protests you want, and none of it does a damn bit of good if the politician thinks that they're in the right, and more importantly, if their backers think they're in the right. So, I'm also not going to talk to you about what Trump is going to do because, again, he told us pretty much everything he intends to do during the campaign. And I do have a little video in mind for later on to kind of sort of address that point, although not directly. No, what I'm here to talk to you about today is what you and I need to do. Well, no, before I get into what you and I need to do, I think I need to give you a little bit of hope here. Because bear in mind that although, yes, Trump is going to be president again, remember that Trump was also the laziest president we have ever had. He put in less than 4 hours per day of work, and he's really intellectually incurious. I don't say stupid. I don't think he's actually stupid, but he absolutely is not curious about anything whatsoever. It's a characteristic he shared with George W. Bush, who also was accused of being pretty stupid at the time. Trump's laziness and his unwillingness to be steered overtly by the people he surrounds himself with means that he is his own best damage limiter. Granted, the people around him are a lot more prepared this time, and he himself has made a point to avoid anybody who might even consider telling him no to anything. But in the long term, he's just not going to want to put in the work. Trump thinks of himself as a king. He reigns, he rules, and nobody can tell him what to do. And that includes nobody can tell him to do work. So a lot of the things that he and his backers want done is likely going to fall through the cracks because he's too lazy to get it done. Another thing is that the Republican majorities in both houses of Congress going forward are going to be fairly thin. The Republicans are going to have 3 votes plus the vice presidency in the Senate, which is not a bad majority, but they're leaving the filibuster in place for now. I fully expect them to get rid of it at a certain point if they can. 3 votes plus the vice presidency, that means if they lose 4 votes on a matter of principle or just a matter of self-preservation, then that's something that Congress is not going to be able to do. In the House, it's going to be worse because they're going to have at most a 4-vote majority, maybe as few as 3. That's right. Right now, it's looking like the Republicans are going to lose a seat on net after this election in the House. And they proved over the past 2 years they can't hold that majority together. They are literally the gang that can't shoot straight. They cannot take the W when they've got it. So a lot of the laws that they want to pass are going to fail simply because somebody wants something a little bit more extreme. So there's all of that. It might not be as bad as everything looks at the present, but we still have to face the fact that if there ever is a competitive election again, it will not be because of the Constitution or the laws, because the Republicans will be enforcing both and defining both. If we have another competitive election, it will be because they failed. because they fumbled, because some Republican somewhere found enough of a backbone, enough of a spine to say, no, I want to have elections because I'm scared of the consequences if we don't. And if a handful of Republicans say that, then 2 years from now, 4 years from now, there might be hope. But the key is we have to survive those 2 years, those 4 years, until we get another say that the Republicans and the Democrats cannot ignore. So what do we do until then? Well, first things first, your top priority in the next 2 to 4 years is to survive, live, keep your head above water, keep out of trouble if you can. If your morals will let you, if your circumstances will let you, do whatever you can to make sure that you're still around, you're still here, and you still have the right to vote. Because only your vote can save us now. Technically, your vote was necessary a little over 2 weeks ago, but that ship has sailed and there's no point in talking about that anymore. So, do what you need to survive. And in this case in particular, I would strongly recommend that you change your budgeting to focus on getting out of debt as much as possible, as soon as possible. Because if Trump gets all his economic plans together with his 20 to 60 to 100% tariffs, depending on country, abolishing labor, getting rid of Medicare, Medicaid, abolishing the Affordable Care Act, if he gets all of this to happen, plus his plan to deport anywhere between 11 and 25 million people, the American economy is headed for a crash, a big one. And when that happens, you're going to need all the credit you can muster and all the cash in the bank you can muster to get through it. So, if you've got a large credit card bill that you've been cycling over, clear it out as soon as you can. If you've got savings, look at the percentage rate on your savings versus the percentage rate on your debts. The debts are going to be charging a lot higher interest. Clear off as much of that as you can, so long as you leave a fund for emergencies, because you will have emergencies and you will need immediate money, and you will not want to go $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in debt if you don't have to. Of course, if you're like me, you don't have $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000 that you can just sit in the bank and leave, but do what you can. Any debt that you're carrying into the next 4 years is probably going to grow, not shrink. And the more in debt you are, the less you're going to be able to do to stop Trump and his cronies. However, since I just said that, don't cut everything. Leave yourself a few hobbies, points of pleasure. Allow yourself joy. Happiness is not just a luxury. It is a human need. You will need something that you can do to relax, to get your mind off things, and you will need money to support that, at least a little. So if you're like me and have a bunch of books, or if you like to go to the movies, that's fine. Set aside a little money for that. Do what you have to stay sane in the next 4 years, because God knows the rest of the country, the rest of the world has gone nuts. And when you're picking out these hobbies, these little pleasures, be sure to set a bit of money aside for the creators who make them. If you can, find something that's not run by the big corporations, but something like fan fiction or artwork or YouTube videos, something that's just done by a couple of people, because those creators are the ones who are going to feel it the worst right now, especially with people like Elon Musk, cozy with Trump, pushing AI, trying to completely render all income for creatives to zero. Creators will need your support more than ever in the days ahead. So if there's someone whose work you really like, find their Patreon or Ko-Fi or whatever crowdfunding system they've got and set aside a little money every month for them. And I don't say every update, say every month. Make it something they can rely on. They're going to need it. They're going to need it very badly. Another thing about surviving. If you have anything contraband in your house, anything that you think if the cops got a hold of it would send you to jail, get rid of it now. Destroy it completely. Don't hand it off to somebody else. Destroy it. Unless it is something that you are actually willing to go to the courts and risk jail time to fight for. The reason for this? Trump is going to pick somebody, not necessarily Matt Gaetz, although he is the one currently picked as I record this, but he's going to pick somebody who is going to use the Federal Justice Department as his weapon to crush all dissent. And they're going to use any tool in their arsenal to reduce the number of legal Democratic voters on any pretext. And if you live in a state with a Republican governor, they're going to do it on that level too. In certain circumstances, they've already begun. Now, if you want to fight the good fight in the courts and take your chances with the right-wing controlled Supreme Court, go for it. If that's where your heart takes you, if that's what you need to do to stay true to yourself, go for it. But remember the risks. And if you're not willing or not able to go to jail over it, get rid of anything that would give the cops the slightest excuse to lock you up. Now, aside from that, the question is, what do you do politically? And I say, stay quiet. I'll explain why in a bit, but I'm going to begin with this. There are going to be a lot of people that say, well, we need to go out and protest. The problem is the Republicans do not listen to protests. They don't care about protests except for one thing. Their reaction to all the protests that happened under the Trump administration was to make it as legal as possible for their supporters to kill protesters. For example, here in Texas, a man plotted to take his car to a Black Lives Matter protest and run over protesters. He bragged about it on the internet. He went out, he did it, he shot somebody at a protest from his car, and the evidence was all there on the internet. It was all presented to a jury, and he was convicted of first-degree murder. And our Republican governor, Greg Abbott, moved heaven and earth, technically violated the laws of the state of Texas so he could pardon the man. Because he wanted to send a message, it's A-OK to kill liberal protesters in Texas. And now we have Donald Trump, who has pledged to use the National Guard and the military to conquer the enemy within, by which he explicitly means Democrats and left-leaning supporters of Democrats. In 2020, during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, he tried to use the National Guard to shoot up protests, and only his Secretary of Defense at the time stopped him from doing it. This time, the brakes are off. So think very carefully before you go out to that protest. If you feel you must go out to that protest, be prepared. Get with the organizers of the protest. Make sure that you have legal counsel on standby to bail you out if they take prisoners. And have your affairs in order before you go out, because Donald Trump, at the very least, he and his core group of advisors really don't care if you live or die, but on balance, if they had to choose, they'd choose you dying. So, if protest doesn't work, well, what does? What does is this. The biggest problem that Democrats had over the past 20 years, really, and it's only getting worse, is that Democrats cannot get a message out. Especially in this past election. all the coverage in almost every venue was focused on what Trump is doing. Oh, Trump is outrageous. Oh, Trump is horrible. Look at what Trump is saying. And all that did was advertise for Trump with his followers and his leaners, while the people who might have been persuaded to vote for Kamala Harris heard nothing. That is why nearly 2/3 of the people who decided in the last week of the election decided to vote for Trump, because they never heard any better. These are the people who are right now going on TikTok and Twitter and what have you saying, oh my God, the ACA and Obamacare are the same thing. I'm going to lose my insurance. Well, yeah. We tried to tell you. You couldn't hear us. So what you need to do, you who are surviving, find somebody who is a friend or even just an acquaintance of yours who is not already fully on board with your political views, and do not talk to them about your political views. At least not right away. Not for the next year at least. But do talk to them. Do interact with them. Do get across the idea that you are trustworthy. And how do you do that? By being trustworthy. By just being there. Somebody they know. Because right now the biggest problem is that the Democrats, even when they're heard, which is seldom, are not trusted. People no longer trust the Democratic Party to stand up for what they believe in. What the people believe in, and even what the Democratic Party believes in. Because the Democratic Party has too many mansions, too many cinemas, too many people who are brought in to the big tent so they can technically win an election while losing every vote on what their policies actually are. You need to build up trust, if you can, with people who are outside your political viewpoint, so that when you do eventually start talking about politics, they will actually listen to you. Now, do I say go to your nearest MAGA and start befriending them? No. If somebody is straight up taking pleasure in your pain right now, or taking pleasure in the pain of LGBT people, of immigrants, of whatever, write them off. They are not persuadable. You will not get through to them on anything. They will never trust you. And all dealing with them will do is hurt your sanity and reduce the chances that you will be around 4 years from now to vote Trump's successor out. But those who are in the middle, if you can find them, those who don't necessarily agree with everything, but who also aren't fully in the tank for Trump, those are the ones you need to reach out to. And you need to reach out to them very gently, very gradually, and you need to wait until they start the political conversation. Trust me, with that kind of person, Donald Trump is going to make it very easy for them to do so, because almost all the policies that Trump and the Heritage Foundation and all the other people who are currently planning to take control come January, all of those policies are intensely unpopular with the vast majority of American people. A lot of the people who voted for Trump honestly don't know what they were voting for. They're going to find out. And when they find out, they're going to bring it up with the people they trust. And that is the time when you gently point out, yes, they said they were going to do this all along. They've said they were going to do this for decades. They've tried to do this for decades. And now they've done it. Now, what are you going to do about it? Well, no, don't put that last sentence in there. Don't throw the weight on them. Let it be their idea. Just point out the fact and let it go. That is the only way the Democratic Party will ever win a national election again, is if they can be persuaded that, yes, the Democratic Party does have their best interests in mind, the people's best interests, And the Republicans are only looking out for the very richest among us. One final note. It is extremely unlikely, but there might come a point where you have a moment of leverage, where you can actually stand up and do something that the Republicans will have to take notice of, that Republicans will not be able to override. I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I have no way of predicting that. You have no way of arranging it. It will be a freak circumstance if it happens at all. When that time comes, be prepared to take your stand. That's part of what getting out of debt is for. At the same time, you should probably also go ahead and get your passport if you can, not necessarily for purposes of leaving the country, but to help conceal those people who feel they have no choice but to leave the country right now, so they can't be hunted down or blocked. Do what little you can when you can. Take your advantages when you can. But above all else, survive. Because even with the best hope in the world we've got, it's going to be a very bad 4 years. I'm Chris Overstreet, and I have opinions.